All right, now we're going to talk about the maritime section, which is where I have a long history. I used to drive ships for a living. This is kind of my background, the whole development of containerization. All I ever really wanted to do was to be a naval architect building sailboats. That dream vanished when my career took me to other places. In the old days, when we first started containerization, the ocean carriers owned the ship, they owned the terminals, and they owned their containers, which meant it was all together. So all of our containers had the same letters on the side, same pictures. The terminals was all one closed system. Today, that doesn't exist anywhere. Now you have all these alliances where you have multiple ships carrying multiple companies' cargo on it, and they're sharing terminals, and depending on where the ship lands, depends on where the chassis are. It's much, much more complicated today than when we first started. And we're going to talk about that as we go through the class. The second most important issue now with maritime transportation is the ship just gets it from port to port, but you still have to get the cargo to the consumer, which means that container has to come off the ship. It has to be moved someplace. It has to be emptied. It has to be put in another truck. It has to get sorted. It then has to be taken to a store. It has to be put on the shelf, or it goes to Amazon and it's sold online, and eventually gets to your front door. That's a whole new part of logistics, what we call last mile deliveries, which becomes kind of important. Now, on the ship side of it, you have to look at what's the most economic way of moving cargo via ocean. As the ships get bigger, you have different container sizes. We're going to cover all of that. And we're going to cover the unique relationship on the west coast of the United States with the International Longshore Workers Union, which controls all of the labor that's applied to loading and unloading ships. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the contribution that the ILWU makes to the cargo movement and whether or not it's valuable to efficient supply chain. The other thing we're going to talk about from time to time is ship stability, how to keep these ships from sinking, which one of the reasons we're going to talk about that is that was my original background. That's something I'm familiar with. And my face-to-face class, love it when we spend time on teaching you how not to have ships sink, because most people want to go on a cruise at some point. And because we're going to cover that in this class, when you go on your cruise, you're going to be able to figure out whether or not you're going to die when it starts to sink. One of the other issues we're going to talk about is the fact that this country, the United States, his maritime policy has shifted away from the way it used to be after the Second World War. And it's one of the few countries, it is the only major economy that doesn't have a robust maritime policy. And there's a security risk to that, and there's an economic risk to that as well, which we'll be chatting about. Okay, flip it over to the other side. Thank you very much. So here is one of my questions for you. In 1960, there were 2,000 plus U.S. flag merchant marine ships that that were registered in the United States, which meant they had to have a U.S. crew. And since I graduated in 1968 from the United States Merchant Marine Academy, that would have been my job to drive one of those ships. Today, there's less than 70. I want to know why the air conditioner worker in Indiana's job is more important than mine was. Because I'm moving ships back and forth with the potential of carrying a dirty bomb. I don't believe that same potential exists in Indiana with that air conditioning worker. And oh, by the way, I had to get a bachelor's degree. I had to pass an FBI security check. I had to get a Coast Guard license, which was much like any other, like an air pilot's license. I had to do all of that. But yet, my job evaporated because we don't have a maritime policy. Why is that air conditioner job, guys stamping metal in Indiana, more valuable than what I was trained to do?